Well, thank you for having me, first of all. And then, of course, we're still in the wait-and-see attitude after the downfall of the Assad regime almost a week ago. Of course, it was very important, the meeting that was held today in Aqaba, Jordan, including all key Arab nations, but mainly the countries bordering Syria, along with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, considering their influential role in inter-Arab politics. And that was followed, of course, with another meeting among the Arab nations, together with the U.S. Secretary of State and the Turkish foreign minister, plus the high representative of the European Union. So this means that all the parties with stake concerning Syria are now discussing the future of this country, which is definitely going to be a very difficult process. But at the end of the day, I think what will determine the outcome are the developments on the ground, the ability of the new regime, let's call it like this, in Syria. The military groups, the armed groups that took over power are now in control of Damascus, whether they'll be truly able to form this inclusive government that meets the needs of the Syrian people and recognize their diversity. And that's, I guess, that's one key point that the Arab ministers who met in Jordan today emphasized the need for an inclusive process, the need for a new constitution, and for elections that are held under the supervision of the United Nations to produce a new government in Syria that will definitely have many difficult tasks ahead, on top of which to meet the direct needs of the Syrian people, as well as facing the growing external aggressions, mainly coming from Israel. It was also noted in the statement issued by the Arab ministers the need for Israel's immediate withdrawal from the territories it occupied in the Golan Heights after the fall of Bashar Assad and other areas along the border between the two nations, calling this an aggression and an illegal occupation. So, finally, it was also very important that the Turkish foreign minister attended those meetings in Jordan because it's very obvious that Turkey had a very big role in the recent developments that happened in Syria. And, of course, it is the key country right now bordering the nation with more than 3 million Syrian refugees. So, of course, it will have, Turkey will have an important say in Syria's future. And then, of course, it was pretty significant that in this meeting in Aqaba, and after many years of Russian and Iranian involvement in the Syrian situation, the representative of Russia and Iran were not present at that meeting.
Now, regarding Al-Aqaba meeting, which was attended by Antony Blinken, what are your thoughts on Antony Blinken's recent statements regarding Syria, that his focus is to establish an all-inclusive political government that represents all factions?
Well, there are two things here to say. First of all, that this is an administration that's going to leave office in a matter of a month, almost. January 20, we're going to have a totally new administration, the Trump administration. Trump, of course, increased a lot of worries and concerns when he tweeted after the fall of Bashar Assad that Syria is basically not a country of interest to the United States, and the United States should not be involved in the situation in Syria. So whether Mr. Trump, who's going to be the official president in a month, it will remain to be seen whether he's going to maintain this stand of staying aside from Syria, or the realities on the ground will force the United States again, and Mr. Trump himself, force him to get involved because Syria is such an important country with such an important geographic location. And of course, whatever happens in Syria is going to affect the countries around it. And nobody wants Syria to turn into a safe haven for terrorist organizations. And of course, the armed groups that took over Damascus recently, they also have to show goodwill and readiness to include all the different sects and all the different ethnic groups within Syria, and not to use their victory in order to seek revenge among other components of the Syrian society, which will basically break the country into civil war. So, of course, it's important to the plan that Mr. Blinken is speaking about, but what's more important is what Mr. Trump will bring in when he becomes the president on January 20th.
Now, building more on Blinken's 12th visit to the region, could this visit result in at least tangible progress for Syrian stability or reconstruction efforts?
Of course. Well, let's wait and see. I mean, again, it all depends on the situation on the ground within Syria itself. Whether the newly formed government will truly be able to take control of the situation whether they will be able to rebuild the Syrian army. Let's not forget that after the fall of Bashar Assad, there's basically no army to protect Syria's border, whether with Israel or with any other neighboring country, Jordan, Iraq, or Turkey, of course. So, I mean, there are a lot of tasks ahead for the upcoming Syrian government, and this is what's going to determine the future of Syria. Of course, with outside help, whether outside parties will encourage the new Syrian government to start this lengthy process of restoring a credible government in Syria is very important, but it all depends on the Syrians themselves, what they are going to accept, and the fact that, or the hope that the new Syrian regime in control of Damascus right now will be able to meet the many challenges that it has, on top of which to keep the Syrian people united and to maintain the territorial integrity of Syria. There are lots of Syria's neighbors who have their own ambitions and their own desire to control more of Syria's territory. So, of course, the sooner there is a strong Syrian government, the better for the Syrian people and the better for the country's future.
Delving more into the Jordan-Syria summit, what are the key outcomes of the summit and how might they shape Syria's future?
It was a 17-point statement that was issued by the Arab ministers, the Arab contact group in relation to Syria. They were all very important points, as I mentioned, starting with the need for a roadmap to form a new Syrian government and to reach a new constitution and to hold new elections, and also appeal to all Syria's neighbors to respect the will of the Syrian people, and of course the willingness to offer help to Syria as soon as the situation stabilizes. It's very important. The Syrian people need a lot of outside help. And of course, again, if the Syrians themselves manage to maintain some stability within the country, this will make the chances better that outside forces will be able to provide help. It's also very important, the message that was sent by the Arab ministers concerning the Israeli aggressions against the Syrian territory and the need to immediately end the Israeli occupation and not to turn it into a permanent issue. And I wish that the United States administration, Mr. Biden's administration, had taken a more outspoken stand about this, but rather we heard from the U.S. Secretary of State, we heard from the U.S. National Security Advisor, Jack Sullivan, statements that express understanding for the illegal Israeli move towards the Syrian territory. So it was an important roadmap, but again, it all depends on what happens on the ground in Syria and the ability to maintain stability and the unity of the Syrian people and the country itself.
So alongside the Israeli airstrikes in Syria, Israeli troops will stay on Mount Hermon for the entire winter. To what extent is Israel strengthening its presence on the Syrian land will impact the Syrian sovereignty?
Well, this is definitely going to be an element of instability. When a neighboring country of Syria, starts the relationship with a new regime by occupying part of its territory, that's definitely not something that's going to help into stability. This statement by the Israeli defense minister that they're going to stay until the end of the winter is not acceptable at all by any international standards. The agreement that was signed between Syria and Israel in 1974 should remain standing even if the regime in Syria has changed, because it was an agreement between two nations, between two countries, and not between two regimes or two governments. Otherwise, we will be breaking havoc in any international agreements. If the president changed we say previous agreements do not exist anymore. So, of course, Israel is benefiting tremendously from all the developments that have taken place recently, whether in terms of the ceasefire in Lebanon and the weakening of the Hezbollah, the group in Lebanon, and of course, right now, getting rid of the Syrian regime that used to provide assistance to Hezbollah and offer ground for Iran to have an influence in the region. This is, of course, has benefited Israel tremendously. But again, if the situation in Syria, within Syria, breaks loose and Syria turns into a safe haven for terrorist organizations or a continuous civil war, this will definitely affect Israel's security as well. And we definitely, we're going to be adding to Syria's problems. And what we need right away is Israel's withdrawal from those Syrian territories, and outside countries and regional powers that have influence within Syria should definitely help the new regime there form its government, offer services to the people, and rebuild its army.
Now, delving into the political developments in Syria, what are the primary challenges facing the new leadership in Syria after Assad's regime?
Well, first of all, it's to form a government. That's the key challenge that they have. Of course, the armed groups that took over Damascus and the key Syrian cities, they do not have experience in governors. They were basically armed organizations that were fighting against the regime over the past 13 years. Maybe they had control of the Idlib province, but that's very small compared to the rest of the country. And so, I mean, again, that's a key challenge to be able to run the day-to-day needs of the Syrian people. And then, of course, there is this serious fear, considering that Syria is basically a mosaic of ethnic groups, of religions, and of different sects. There are serious fears about the coexistence among the Syrian people. Of course, the political groups or the armed groups that took over Syria have their own ideology, and the big question remains whether they will be able to overcome their own ideology to be more inclusive and to accept the rights of the other minorities and other the ethnic groups within Syria, because that's the only way to maintain calm and peace within the country itself. And then followed by that, we need a new army, a new police force, a new constitution. And that's all a lot of tasks that the new the Syrian government is facing as challenges. And they definitely need the help of the neighbors and not attempts to interfere and steal or occupy parts of Syria's territory.